Hey, thanks so much for watching. Session number 4, we are talking about stop Satan's darts, the fiery darts of the wicked one. Ephesians 6:16, we are coming into this fourth session. We'll talk about the shield of faith and how it is a defensive part of the armor of God that we're going to unpack here. What's interesting is it's one of the tools that the Roman soldiers would hold. In one hand, they'd have their shield, and the other hand, they'd have their sword. And yet, what we're going to look at is just as the helmet was something that they would put on, the body armor was something they'd put on, the belt and the shoes were all things they'd put on. The shield was functionally an extension of who they were. And so we'll talk about why Paul uses the shield as this illustration of our faith. Is it our faith in God? Is it our faith that saves us? Is it faith in the unseen? Like, how does and why did Paul talk about faith being this shield to stop attacks? So we'll unpack that. We're going to start off, however, with an Ephesus story on page 63. We're going to look at this chapter 4, arrows. This brief story we're going to talk about. We've talked about the father. Last session we talked about the mother. We're going to introduce some of their teenage kids now, their son in this session, and then their daughter in the next session. Listen in. He loved the sound before he ever saw the blood, the clang of metal, the roar of the crowd rising from the great theater, strength on display, courage sharpened by danger. For a boy growing up in Ephesus, the gladiators were legends, men who faced death and did not flinch. He imagined himself standing tall one day, unafraid, admired, powerful. But admiration has a way of drawing fire. Whispers followed him through the streets now. He's one of them, a follower of the way. Once a stone flew past his head. Another time, a shove turned into laughter that burned worse than bruises. And fear lodged in his chest like a splinter he couldn't pull out. An older gladiator noticed him lingering and offered small kindnesses, fetching water, having him polish armor, cleaning blood from stone floors. The work was dangerous, but it was intoxicating. The men spoke of gods and fate, of rituals whispered before fights, charms tied beneath shields. They mocked weakness, they mocked mercy. At night, however, doubt crept in. If your God is real, why does following him make you a target? Why does faith feel like standing still while arrows fly? He wanted to be brave, but bravery, he was learning, wasn't the absence of fear. It was what you did when fear came burning toward you. And one evening, as torches flickered against the walls, he remembered words his father had spoken softly at the table. Hold up the shield of faith. Not a sword, not fist clenched in anger, a shield raised, ready, steady, absorbing what would otherwise wound. Faith didn't make the darts disappear, it stopped them from defining him. So he prayed, not loudly, not perfectly, but honestly. He chose trust over shame. He stepped back from places that promised strength but demanded his soul. And when another insult came, he didn't strike back, he stood. The pressure didn't ease, the heat didn't fade, but the arrows no longer found their mark. And in a city obsessed with spectacle and power, a young boy discovered a greater strength, one that didn't attack, but endured, one that proved no arrow is stronger than faith in a faithful God. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 16, we see this wonderful passage unfold. In addition to all this that Paul has talked about, take up the shield of faith with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. The shields that the Roman soldiers would carry were about the size of a small door, anywhere from 3.5 to 4 feet high, and maybe 2 to 2.5 feet wide. They would decorate their shield, they would paint it, they would cover it with all kinds of images and emblems and symbols that would give them their sense of identity, the fighting regiment that they were associated with. They would have many times a kind of piece of metallic shielding that would go in the center of it, right where their hand would be behind as the handhold. They would also have their shields would be covered in sometimes with leather, sometimes with other kind of cloth, so that when they would go into battle, these shields, which were most often wooden, by the way, they would cover them in water. They would soak them, and you can imagine taking leather or a piece of cloth and wood, and how heavy then those shields would be. But they would soak them in water so that when the flaming arrows would be launched, just as if you had seen some kind of movie with Romans fighting each other, or some kind of medieval times when they had flaming arrows coming, that these arrows, that as soon as they hit the shield, they wouldn't consume the shield, but the fire would be extinguished by this saturated water, by the water that was in the cloth or in the leather of the shield. What it brings us to is this, that we can find ourselves, that we can extinguish the darts before they do any lasting damage, these attacks from Satan. Because no arrow is stronger than our faith, as we just read a moment ago, faith in a faithful God. What we're going to talk about and unpack in this session, how to stop Satan's darts, his attacks, is this struggle that we'll start with is this, that fear, doubt, and shame can pierce hearts like fiery arrows. And what's challenging about this, by the way, is that these arrows, they seem like, and often the source is confusing, because the source of fear, shame, doubt, accusations, guilt, it can come from other people around us. It can come from regrets from our past. It can come from doubts within. And what Paul keeps continually bringing us back to is this, is our enemy, your enemy, is unseen. It is not the person, it's not the coach, it's not the teacher, it's not the person that seems to have it out for you or for me. That they are not the enemy. They are not the ones leveling the accusations. What sometimes happens is that somebody says something, and yes, I will give you, I'm not gaslighting you, but I'll give us that, yes, people do say things to hurt us. They'll swear, they'll say things to try to hurt our feelings or our relationship, to try to impact us. Yes, so granted. But Satan is involved, and what he wants to do is, when there's something that's said, that as it's leaving the lips of the speaker and coming into our ears, that something happens in the translation, and before it can hit our hearts, all of a sudden now it begins to cause us to doubt ourselves, to doubt God, to doubt each other. And what it was doing to these folks, these followers of Jesus in Ephesus, is they began to turn on each other. And Paul talks about in Ephesians 4, he says, tell each other tell each other the truth, Ephesians 5, to deal right with each other, to be kind toward each other, to not allow these differences to drive a wedge between you. And so, how do we extinguish? Well, it comes back to our common faith that we have in God, that draws us together. We'll unpack this here in just a minute. So, the struggle we have then is this: fear, doubt, shame. The big question: how do I fight the lies that burn through my confidence and hope? The lies we tell ourselves, the lies that maybe someone else has told us, the lies that Satan allows to come and slip into our hearts and minds. So, the big idea is this: it's the shield of faith that extinguishes those fiery darts from the enemy. What we'll look at then is this: how does faith shield us from Satan's attacks? How does faith shield us then from Satan's attacks? Number one is this: faith protects our heart. Have you noticed over and over and over again, Paul talks about how our heart, the center, the core of who we are, he talks about our heart having eyes to perceive things. In Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, it says, guard your heart because it determines the course of your life. How many of us, we could all raise our hands and share and tell how some kind of statement or some circumstance that happened to us years ago has really shaped how we see ourselves It has jaded us, maybe. It's caused us to become more cynical. Maybe something we even heard a pastor say at some point caused us to kind of walk away from the church a little bit. And we're now just coming back around. But something settled in us in our heart. And now Satan has used that as a foothold to cause there to be some kind of stronghold then in our life, in our soul, that's really shaped us and kept us back from walking with God, from being at peace with other people, from believing the truth about who we are, about who God is, about the reality around us. And so what we look at here is this in Ephesians 6:16, this passage for us. In addition to all these things, there's a shield of faith that stops these arrows that Satan shoots at us. How does faith stop the attacks before they take root? Well, it protects us. It protects our emotions, our decisions, and our imagination. Faith, all throughout the scriptures, is this belief, it's this trust in God. It's faith and faithful. It's the idea of that there is a trust and there's a loyalty and there's an allegiance, that there is a steadiness and a steadfastness, that faithfulness and endurance many times can be interchangeable. Faithfulness and faith is trusting in what we cannot see. Paul says in Corinthians that we walk by faith and not by sight. Well, that's kind of hard, because didn't he just say that our hearts have eyes? What does that mean exactly? If we walk through life based on what we can see, we're really going to be fearful. Just like we talked about several sessions ago about Elisha and his servant, his assistant that was with him. Elisha was surrounded, and you read about it in the one of the devotionals and the introduction of the study guide, that they had this army was out to get Elisha because they're going to take the prophet out. And so this assistant wakes up early in the morning and sees this army encamped around him, and he's totally fearful. What are we going to do? And so Elisha prays and says, God, open the eyes of my assistant. And God opens his eyes, and he sees an incredible army, an angelic host of angels, of warriors around them, and chariots and horses around them. And so, with his eyes open, Elisha then prays a second prayer and says, blind the eyes of the army that's against us. And God causes this great miracle where the heavenly host, they cause blindness to go across the physical army that's opposing Elisha and his assistant. And they get disoriented and they end up losing their way. And they don't go after Elisha, and they end up fleeing and they retreat. And so what we find here is this, that faith has the ability to help us to grow in our understanding, to grow in our maturity. Faith is this growth of trusting even when we can't see. It guards our heart against lies like I'm not enough or God's abandoned me. Faith has the ability to take the poison, to suck it out, to remove it from the lies or deceptions that we believe, circumstances. As we trust God, God, I'm going to trust you. What it looks like right now, I have no money, but I'm going to trust you that you're going to get me through. What it looks like right now is my job situation is really hard, but I'm going to trust you to help me get through. What does it look like now? I'm in a really tough season as a parent, and I don't know how I'm going to make it through. I'm in a really difficult season. I'm lonely in my marital status. I'm single, or I'm going through a tough marriage situation and I feel so lonely. But I'm going to trust you, God, that you're going to help me get through. And I'm not going to internalize these lies that Satan just lobs at me. Lies such as your circumstances will never change, that God is against you, that this is not going to work out. You're never going to get beyond this. And our faith and trust in God begins to extinguish little by little these lies from Satan. What we find is this: faith isn't a quick fix. It's a daily, steady posture of trust, like holding up a shield in a slow motion battle. Every step, every choice, every prayer strengthens us being able to hold up that shield. As opposed to dropping the shield, faith says going to protect. What we find as well, faith not just protects our heart, but it shapes our perspective. If you notice, many of these different parts of the armor, they really shape and protect our heart. They shape our soul. They shape our imagination, just as peace shapes our imagination. So faith shapes our perspective. Ephesians 1:18-20 says, I pray that the eyes of your heart, we used this before, may be enlightened so that you may know the hope to which you have been called, the riches of his glorious inheritance to the saints, and his incomparable great power for us, for who believe. What's interesting to note as we unpack this passage, he says that you'll be able to see your heart. Again, does it have eyes? No, but it can perceive things. The word there, enlighten, what does it mean? It means to literally like to flip a switch. When you walk into a room that's darkened, what do? You have the potential to trip and stumble over things. You can't see clearly. You don't know how to work your way through. You can't see threats. You can't see the good. You can't see the bad. You're just kind of stumbling your way through. What faith does is faith lights up for us the reality that's taking place around us and helps us filter out what is not true, what is deception, what is true about us, and protects us and extinguishes those darts. So faith, it protects us, it shapes our perspective. It says, he says, so that you may know. So to be enlightened in our heart, but then know what? Hope to which you've been called. Hope is the anticipation of good to come. Hope is this, that this situation is not the enemy. While my emotions are real, they are not my reality. While my emotions are very real, they are not the rest of my life. This is a season in my life. This season is not the rest of my life. It does not define me. The riches of his glorious inheritance to the saints. It is this, that he says, this is what Paul is telling us, the riches of his glorious inheritance. He's going to unpack that phrase over the next several chapters of what do we have in Christ, the depth of who we are as our reality in God. What is that in our lives? And he'll unpack that. But he says this faith, this shield, is what protects all that we have in Christ. His incomparable great power for what? For us who believe. What is believe? Believe is trust. It is the faith to trust, to believe somebody. Do you struggle to believe? If you have had people let you down or break promises, you may struggle to trust people. You may struggle with faith to trust God. And what God is saying to us is this, is there are things that will unfold in your life that you can't explain, that you will not understand, but God is calling us each day to trust him. Faith allows us to pause, notice, and participate in God's work rather than reacting to every dart that comes. What's difficult and what's interesting about darts for Roman soldiers, darts were disorienting. If you had somebody attacking you, coming at you with a sword while they're rushing towards you, you could go ahead and pull out your sword and get your shield, and you could kind of go at their attack. But if you had a dart flying at you overhead, it's kind of like, if you ever watched a golf ball, trying to watch on the Masters, or the whatever cup is being played, and they launch the ball and you kind of lose sight, like I can't see where it's coming from, and it gets disorienting. When these arrows would come at somebody, if you've ever had something flying at your face, what do? You flinch, you look away. I'll never forget, in high school, we would, for gym class, play different sports, and the coach would teach us the fundamentals of the sport and introduce us all. We learn the history of it, the fundamentals, how do you play the game. Well, I'll never forget when there was a season in our gym class where it was time to learn about softball. And so we learned about softball. We talked about softball. We talked about the bats, how the games were played, how it was different from the baseball, all these things. And so we played, and a buddy of mine was playing center field. Somebody hit a pop fly ball to center field, and it got right up in where the sun was. It was real hard to see. And all of a sudden, that thing came crashing back to the ground, and it hit my buddy Chris. It hit him right on the forehead, bounced off, ding, knocked him to the ground. He's laying on the ground. We go over. That softball hit him so hard that he had a bruise, little laceration in his forehead, kind of like Harry Potter has the Horcrux, the little lightning thing. Well, he had the threads from the softball indented in like a cuts in his forehead. So the thing with these arrows, not just is it that it's coming at them, but the enemy, they would shoot for not just at a person's shield. They wouldn't shoot for the shield. They'd shoot anywhere or they could. They would shoot over their head to hit the back of the line of where the soldiers were at. So they would shoot for their encampment, their tents. Their tents would be flammable. And if they could hit their tents where they were encamped, they would burn their tents down. They would hit their supply lines that sometimes could be unguarded. They would shoot at their feet to get at their sandals and start a fire there. If the shields weren't soaked in water and an arrow struck it, why was it dangerous? Well, because it wouldn't just hit the shield, it would hit the shield and begin to then consume the shield. Fire isn't just something that stops, it is something that continues to grow. And what I love about what he says here is if we don't extinguish Satan's darts of the lies or the deceptions that he sends our way or the attacks that he gives to us, if we don't allow our faith and trusting God, I have to choose to trust, even when it doesn't feel like it. If we don't allow God's word, if we don't allow our faith in God, our trust in God, if we don't allow our faith that we have in common with other believers, if we don't allow it to extinguish the darts, it will consume us. It'll consume our faith. It'll cause us to run in fear. The Romans had a strategy with their shields. It was a formation called a testudo, not a tuxedo, but a testudo. And it was testudo was a Latin word, Roman word for the turtle or the shell. And so you may have seen this maybe in history class or in a movie or something, where all the soldiers on the front line, they would drop to their knees and they would interlock their shields, one shield to another. They would interlock, interlock, interlock. The soldiers then on the sides would do the same and round off the sides, and then those standing behind them, they would hatch or they would overlay their shield with the shield in front of them. So the front line would put their shields in front of them. The men standing behind them would put the shield over them to kind of like layer, almost like a thatched roof or like shingles. And then the guys behind them would overlay, just like maybe overlay like armor or like feathers would overlay, and they would do that and lock in, kind of like an armadillo or a turtle shell, to protect themselves. So as soon as a volley of arrows flew, they were able to extinguish the soaked shields, would extinguish those fiery arrows, those darts. But if one soldier didn't play his part, didn't hold up a shield in the front, didn't hold up a shield on the side, didn't hold up a shield in the middle, now you've got a weakness. If he would run, if he would drop his shield, now all of a sudden Satan has a foothold or has a way of getting in. The enemy has a way of getting in. And it's encouraging for us. And think about this. I say this carefully. When you're like thinking about, man, I'm too tired. You know when Satan attacks us, attacks me, attacks my family, Saturday night and Sunday morning. Why? Because if he can keep me from being with other believers, if he can keep you from being with other believers, all of a sudden now when I don't show up, I don't have my shield to help other people with their faith. I don't have my faith in place to help others to keep their faith in place. And when I stop showing up, when I stop expressing and exercising my faith, then all of a sudden now there has the chance of somebody else losing faith and somebody else losing faith. And all of a sudden now, if you will, for lack of a better way of saying it, we've broken ranks and now Satan has us on the run. He has us fleeing. He has a wedge there. There's division there all of a sudden. And we come back to what does Paul say? That this faith, it shapes our perspective then for us. Then we come and we look at number 3, faith empowers action. Faith empowers action. We find here that in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 14 to 16, what I love about this is you have Paul going piece by piece, step by step, talking about all the armor and how it illustrates the spiritual life. So you have the seen being representative of the unseen. The belt, you can see the truth that is unseen. The the body armor of righteousness, the seen, the righteousness, the unseen. The shoes are seen, the gospel of peace is the unseen. And in addition to all these, hold up what? He says all of those things are needed and they can protect you for a time. But my body armor, unless I'm a human shield, we use that terminology, I if I don't have my shield held up and in place, and yours held up and in place, kind of like I can put you kind of use these books, laying one over the other, one over the other, one over the other. Now all of a sudden, my ability to help protect you and you help protect me, we have those. And so when Paul says in addition, it's not this idea this is about you by yourself. Your faith is in community with other people. Our society, our Western civilization, we're very much about the individual, individualized. I I don't need people. I don't need help. I'm a self-made person. I got through it myself, all by myself. I did it my way. It's all very selfish, self-focused, very much um, about it's humanistic, if you will. It elevates the human above the individual, above anybody else. It's kind of survival of the fittest, if you will. Like if you can't keep up, then get out of the way, kind of thing. It's I talk about this all the time. Delaware County. You go to Wawa, the convenience store, with the gas station, and on your way into the convenience store, if you're getting coffee, you're fine because people will hold the door for you. Be kind. Hey, go birds, go birds. It's like it's the universal language around Philadelphia, right? But if you get in my way as I'm trying to pull through the parking lot, I'll run you down. That's just kind of how it is, right? And what we find is this: for the Roman soldiers, they had to trust each other implicitly. You didn't have time in the midst of conflict and combat. You didn't have the leisure to say, "Hey, what did you exactly mean by XYZ? Like, what are you doing over there?" It was, hey, they would call the command of warning. There's a volley of fiery arrows coming, darts coming at us. Testudo. And they would call the command and take the formation. What we find here is this, as he says, this is an extension when soldiers, even as young Romans, at a young age, they would begin to practice with shields as an extension, just like uh, our hand is an extension of the rest of us, as an extension of their body. They would begin to use the shield as an extension of who they were, to take it with them everywhere they went. Don't ever leave your shield behind because it wasn't just about protecting yourself, it was about protecting the guy next to you on the left and the right and behind you and in front of you. Our faith, it's easy in our society today, especially in our church culture, we're beginning to deconstruct our faith. And while on the one hand, I think it's a good thing, a good way in that we are deconstructing and questioning what we talked about in previous sessions. What is just opinion, what is preference, and what truly is essential in our faith? What are the essentials of our faith in God? And setting aside elevating these opinions and preferences to a level of morality or theology and saying, well, this is essential when it's simply just a preference we have or an opinion that we have. What we're finding today is more and more that there's not just a deconstruction of faith, and it's not just, I don't know what I'm not sure what I believe, but it's, I don't need you anymore. I don't need the church anymore. I don't need believers anymore. There's no problem with doubt. But doubt or deconstruction in isolation, that's where the danger comes. That if your armor is falling apart and there's leather straps, and by the way, when Romans would put their armor on, they had fasteners and leather straps and different things. They would put the armor on, but then they would cinch it up. They would need help from somebody else to secure and fasten and cinch tight the body armor and the belt and hand them their things and put their pack on their shoulders. And so they would help one another do this. When we're working through doubts and difficulties and deconstructing things, if you will, we do it in community. We do it with other believers to be able to say, hey, I'm not so sure about some of these things. I'm not so sure about what I believe. If you are on the listening end, don't react or freak out like, "Oh, I can't believe that. Are you questioning?" No, of course, yeah. They're processing through their faith. The person's trying to figure things out. This is just a total side note. I believe Matthew, growing up in a very religious home, there's obviously something about the Jewish faith. The guy grows up and becomes a tax collector for the Roman Empire. Unless his family were sympathizers with the Romans, like obviously he was walking away from something, or his family was walking away from the Jewish faith. And so either he did it on his own or they did it together. What's amazing is I think if you study the Gospel of Matthew and what he writes about and what he talks about, it comes through very strongly that he is going against and he's deconstructing the Jewish faith of some of the preconceived ideologies and sacred cows that they held to, and he's appealing to the Messiah as the authority, as the final say, not what rabbis or Jewish religious elite had said, but the word and the authority and the command of Jesus as Messiah. And he makes a case for that all throughout the gospel. But what we find is this is that it empowers us then to action. When we are able to hold up our shield together, it empowers us to protect each other and move forward together in our faith. What we find then, number four, is this. We see faith connects us to God and to others. And this goes hand in hand with this last point, number three, about it empowers us to action. Faith connects us. It's this synchronized, spiritually speaking, the faith that connects us to God, it's our line to God, but it's also our line to each other. What we have in common, our love for each other and our faith of what we believe about God, what we believe about the truth we believe about the reality around us. Ephesians 3:16-17, Paul says, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his spirit in your internal, in your inner being, in your inner person, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through what? Through faith. Through faith. So, what is that? Can you literally see, like we would tell kids, I remember the church I grew up in, are you going to ask Jesus into your heart? Well, some of that nomenclature, those cliche things, like what are you going to, like have surgery and crack my sternum open and take a little baby Jesus, like little tiny plastic Jesus, a medical version of it, and put it inside of my heart for me, and then close me back up and sew me back up, and there we go. Jesus is in my heart. No, like that's just terminology we use. But the understanding is, it's this that he says here that Christ may dwell in your hearts through what? Through the trust that you have in God, through the trust that you grow and develop between each other, through the beliefs that you have that are worked out in your lives. So it's the truth and it's the righteousness that's worked out through our everyday living. So it's not just about how we behave at church, but it's that about who we are and how we behave when nobody's watching. It's about how we believe and who we are when we go through difficulties, about questioning God. And God allows us to go through these fiery trials, and God allows us to go through temptations, and God allows us to go through testings. But the idea is to come out on the other side stronger, that the trying of your what? Faith. James says in James chapter 1, the trying of your faith, of your trust in God. More people have walked away from church, deconstructing their faith or working through these things, not because of really of God, but because they began to question what somebody said, but because they looked at somebody and they looked at a pastor or an ideology of a church or maybe some trauma or something somebody said, and they pointed at that situation or issue and said, because of that, I'm going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I'm going to walk away totally from my faith. And what Paul is calling us to here is he says that at some point we will have a crisis moment of we will either cross the line and choose to trust God and we live by our faith, our trust in God, or we are going to continue to live in fear and in doubt. And we drop the shield effectually. We let go and we walk away. Faith. While it is personal, it would protect the soldier. It is also communal, and it would protect the guy next to them on the left or right. We are not meant to bear the battle alone. God strengthens our inner being and uses faith of others to help support us, because we're going to have times when we're weak. We're going to have times when we're struggling. Never forget reading a military book on military strategies and leadership and about Navy SEALs. And the beginning of the book, the guy has this incredible story about going through Hell Week and the Navy SEAL training. And he says he was dropped. They dropped the guys out, and they had to in the ocean. They had to swim back, and he had gone through all this and was so exhausted. And he said he could bear. His lungs were burning. The lactic acid just coursing through his muscles. He was just exhausted. And he said he just popped his head above a wave, and he looked toward the shore, and he saw one of his buddies who had made it in, and he locked eyes with him, and he just pointed at him and motioned for him, "Come on, come in. You got this. Come." And he gave him the signal, gave him the sign, and he said it wasn't some kind of mystical, some magical kind of thing that happened, fairy tale thing like fairy dust, but something in him, the adrenaline kicked in, and he reached a deep reserve of strength because of the faith, because of the belief of his buddy who had already gotten there. It gave him the courage, the faith, if you want to call it that, to keep going. And he all of a sudden got this supernatural surge, and he swam in and completed his training and became a SEAL, a Navy SEAL. And what Paul is calling to us, he reminds us that we are part of a larger army of believers, all lifting our shields together in prayer and encouragement and in presence of God and of each other. And so what we find then is that faith creates a rhythm of steady reliance, trusting God, depending on his spirit, and joining with others to experience unhurried strength in the battle. That's why church is important. That's why studying the Bible together with other believers is important. That's why sharing what we're going through is important. That's why discussion time at the end of the service is important. That's why worship time, singing worship songs is important. That's why sometimes the most powerful thing that you're going to experience is what takes place before the service and after the service. That's why we have donuts and coffee and a chance for people to connect. That's why we have fellowship sometimes when we have food afterward, for a chance for people to gather around and connect. Because in our world where we're constantly having these pseudo artificial connections through these disembodied connections, when we have in real life embodied person to person, something happens. Jesus says, where two or three are gathered together, that my presence is felt and known there in the midst of them. That when we gather together, there truly is, and I know this is cliche, but there truly is strength in numbers. That there's something about my spirit and your spirit, and we get on the same page, on the same wavelength. And when we are pulling together, we are putting up our shields of faith together, we then can stand strong and encourage each other. And that brings us then to this reflection. Lift this shield daily. Choose trust over fear and faith over feelings. Take a few moments, look at the discussion questions, do the daily devotionals for the in between sessions, and look forward to seeing you in session number 5, where we talk about how to guard your mind. And we'll talk about the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit. Thanks so much for watching.